Hi, and welcome to the Chapter 8 review video. This is Miss Guida. Make sure you follow along with the video and copy notes to complete the problems. Feel free to pause and rewatch parts of the video until you feel confident with the material. No late or incomplete reviews will be accepted. The first thing we need to think about in terms of right triangles is when to use each method of solving. So we're going to use the Pythagorean theorem when we're dealing with all sides in a right triangle. So these are problems that we're only dealing with sides. Then we learned about trigonometry. We used trigonometry when we were solving for a side, but that light bulb should go off in your brain when you see an angle or when they give you an angle. And finally, we're going to use inverse trig when we're solving for an angle. Anytime we have a trig or inverse trig problem, I always write SOHCAHTOA on my paper. Sine is O over H, cosine is A over H, tangent is O over A. And that way I have something to refer back to every time I do a trig problem. Question number 1 says, Disney's Tower of Terror ride in Disney World, Florida is 199 feet tall. If Josh is standing 132 feet from the base of the ride, what is the angle of elevation from the point where Josh is standing to the top of the tower? Round to the nearest degree. Anytime we see word problems, we're going to make sure we draw a picture. It's just a right triangle. We know that the Tower of Terror, the ride, is 199 feet tall. That's going to be your vertical side of the triangle. We know that he is standing 132 feet from the base of the ride. Our keyword was base. I'm going to label the bottom as a 132. And I'm looking for the angle of elevation. If an angle of elevation or angle of depression, I always put it in the bottom corner. I'm solving for an angle, which means I'm going to be using inverse trig. Label your sides. We have O and A. O and A means tangent. It's the tangent of x is equal to 199 over 132. At this step, we're going to do inverse tan in our calculators. That's second and then the tangent button of 199 over 132. That gives us that x is equal to 56.4. Now go back and read the question. They want us to round it to the nearest degree, so my final answer would be 56 degrees. Next question. Number 2 says the angle of elevation from a park bench 778 feet from the base of the Gateway Arch in St. Louis, Missouri is 39 degrees. How tall is the arch? So again, we're drawing our right triangle. We know the angle of elevation is 39 degrees. I'm going to put that at the bottom right corner. The park bench is 778 feet from the base of the arch. Keyword is base. So 778 is going to go on the bottom. And I'm looking for how tall. That's the vertical side. They're giving us an angle. Key is we're doing trigonometry. Highlight your angle, label your sides. O and A means I'm going to be using tangent of 39 is equal to x over 778. At this step, we're going to cross multiply. I get x is equal to 778 tan 39. And I'm going to plug this in my calculator. Rounding to the nearest hundredth, I get that x is equal to 630.01. Next question. 3 says a rope from the top of a mast on a sailboat is attached to a point 19 feet from the mast. If the rope is 28 feet long, how tall is the mast? Round to the nearest foot. start by drawing that right triangle, and let's see what information we're given. I know that I'm looking for how tall is the mast. That's my vertical side. I know that the rope is 28 feet long. The rope, the ladder, those are typically our diagonal sides, our hypotenuse. So 28 feet is our hypotenuse. And 19 feet is going to be on the base. When I look at this problem, I'm only dealing with the side length of a right triangle, which means I'm going to use the Pythagorean theorem to solve. So x squared plus 19 squared equals 28 squared. I solve x squared plus 361 is equal to 784. We subtract 361 from both sides. X squared is 423. Final step is to take the square root of 423. When we do that, x is 20.6. Question number 4. Do the side lengths 10, 26, and 24 form a right triangle? Well, if 3 side lengths form a right triangle in particular, the Pythagorean theorem should work. We should get that a squared plus b squared equals c squared. That's what we want to know. Find your hypotenuse. The hypotenuse here is 26. Make sure that's your c. 10 squared plus 24 squared, does it equal 26 squared? That's what we want to know. When I add 10 squared and 24 squared, this gives me 676. And when I square 26, it also gives me 676. I have two numbers that are equal, which means yes, it does form a right triangle. Question number 5 is one of these multi-step trig problems. We have multiple variables to solve for. Let's start off by finding x. X is going to be dealing with the right side triangle. Here's our 42 degrees. 8 would be your opposite side. X would be your adjacent. So I'm going to use tangent. I have the tangent of 42 is equal to 8 over x. When you cross multiply, you get 8 equals x tan 42. Final step would be divide both sides by the tangent of 42. And when we do that, x equals 8.9. Now I need to find y. But the issue is we can't just go ahead and find y right off the bat. If I'm using the 29 degrees, I'm using the whole triangle that I'm shading in red. So really, I'm going to be finding the entire base of this triangle. I'm naming it z so I don't confuse my variables. Let's go ahead and solve for z. 29 is the angle that we're talking about. Again, we're using tangent. It's the tangent of 29 degrees is equal to 8 over z. When we cross multiply, I get that 8 is equal to z tangent of 29. I'm going to divide both sides by the tangent of 29 and get that z is equal to 14.4. So if z is the whole length, and I already found x, which was the piece I already used, is 8.9, I can subtract those two numbers, and that will give me what y is. When I subtract, I get that 5.5 equals y. The next question, which is numbered 16, says find the sine, cosine, and tangent of angle A. Give your answer as a fraction in simplest form. So all it wants is the fraction, or ratio. We do not need to take out our calculators and do sine, cosine, or tangent here. So let's find the angle that they're talking about. It says we're using angle A, highlight angle A, and label your sides. We have an O, which is at BC, 16 is your adjacent, 20 is the hypotenuse. Before we do anything, we need to realize that we don't know what side BC is. we do know we have a right triangle, and we can go ahead and solve for that missing side using the Pythagorean theorem. I know that 16 squared plus x squared equals 20 squared. That gives me 256 plus x squared equals 400. Subtract from both sides, and we know that x squared equals 144, so x equals 12. Put that on your picture. In order to find the sign ratio, I'm going to write them at the bottom. Sign is O over H. In this case, that's 12 over 20. When you simplify, we get 3 over 5. The cosine is A over H. In this case, it's 16 over 20. When I simplify that fraction, we get 4 over 5. Finally, the tangent ratio is O over A, or 12 over 16, which is 3 over 4. Do make sure you simplify it if the directions say to do so. Determine whether the sides 20, 21, and 29 form a right, acute, or obtuse triangle. Explain. This is when we want to compare c squared to a squared plus b squared. Always make sure you put your c squareds first when we're comparing. If c squared is equal to a squared plus b squared, then it's a right triangle. If c squared is less than a squared plus b squared, it'll be an acute triangle. And if c squared is greater than a squared plus b squared, it's an obtuse triangle. So let's go ahead and do the math for this one. Make sure you know what your c is. It's the largest number. In this case, that's a 29. So 29 squared compared with 20 squared plus 21 squared. When I square 29, we get 841. Compares with 20 squared plus 21 squared is also 841. Those two numbers are equal, so we have a right triangle. The next question is a special right triangle question. We know we need to leave our answer in simplest radical form. We'll note that this is a 45, 45, right, 90 right triangle. That means both of our legs are congruent. So if the right side is 5, then the left leg will also be 5. The rule for finding the hypotenuse is n square root 2. In this case, we have 5 square root 2. So the side y is going to be 5 square root 2. Once again, we have another 45, 45, 90 degree special right triangle. You'll notice this question is slightly different because they're giving us the hypotenuse. Always write down our rule. I know that the hypotenuse, which is 16, is equal to n times the square root of 2. Our goal is to figure out what n is, to figure out what the legs of our triangle are. So in order to get n by itself, I'm going to divide both sides by the square root of 2. We get 16 over the square root of 2. But you'll remember from class, we're not allowed to have square roots in our denominator. So we're going to rationalize the denominator by multiplying the top and the bottom by the square root of 2. In this case, we get 16 square root of 2 in the numerator over the square root of 4. But what is the square root of 4? The square root of 4 gives us 2 in our denominator. We have one more step on this problem because we can actually divide these numbers. 16 divided by 2 gives you 8 square root 2. That's going to be the answer for x and the answer for y because both of our legs are congruent. This is a different special right triangle. It's a 30, 60, 90 right triangle. Let's see what side they give me first. We're being given the hypotenuse of this right triangle. The rule for a 30, 60, 90 right triangle is that the hypotenuse, which is 22, is equal to 2 times n. Let's go ahead and solve for n. 11 equals n. That means the side across from the 30 degrees, the side that's labeled as a y, is going to be equal to 11. The rule to find x is that we take n and we multiply it by the square root of 3. So x is going to be 11 times the square root of 3. Final question, we have one more 30, 60, 90 degree right triangle. Again, they're giving us the long leg on this triangle. So we write down that 42 equals, the rule is it's equal to n times the square root of 3. Our goal is to get the n by itself, so I'm going to divide both sides by the square root of 3. When I have 42 over root 3, we know we need to rationalize our denominator. Multiply the top and the bottom by the square root of 3. We have 42 square root of 3 over the square root of 9. But we do know we can take the square root of 9, so we end up having that 42 root 3 over 3. Final step is see if we can divide. 42 can be divided by 3, and we get that 14 root 3 is our n value. In this case, that's going to be the side labeled as x across from the 30 degrees. In order to find the hypotenuse, I double that. So double 14 gives us a 28. Bring down your square root of 3, and that's equal to your y variable.